Hello, welcome to the next part of Cuban Missile Crisis. What caused the escalation of tensions in the Cuban Missile Crisis? Well, Soviet aggression caused the escalation of tension because the missiles were deemed by the US to have aggressive intentions. Okay, Khrushchev wanted political, strategic, and military gains. He wanted to leverage concessions for West Berlin. He wanted to counter the missiles placed in Turkey, the Jupiter missiles. So this led to tension because the US saw this as a direct threat to their sovereignty, to their security, right? The fact that these missiles were covertly placed or secretly placed threatened the US and make it seem that the Soviet Union were the aggressors who are wanting to do a first strike nuclear attack against the US. So the US started arming itself and retaliating fiercely. That is why Soviet aggression first in installing the missiles are the ones that caused the tensions to rise in the region. Okay? So the US is very wary because these missiles can actually hit many different countries in the US. So, next reason for increase in tensions can be that Khrushchev's response to the blockade. Because he totally ignored it. He condemned it, he ignored it, he told his ships to ignore it and just pass through to Cuba. Of course, they couldn't because they were stopped by the US. Okay, and he constantly denied the deployment of the missiles. Okay, this is why the US was forced to retaliate because the US wanted to protect its international reputation. Okay, and Khrushchev was unwilling to back down, and this led to the arguments between the US and Cuba and the Soviet Union, and hence worsening relations between these countries and increasing the tensions. Alternatively, this can also be seen as a reason for the US escalated tensions in the region. Okay, this is Khrushchev looking very angry. So the US were the one who introduced the naval blockade because this was a strategy known by Kennedy as brinksmanship, pushing the world closer to a nuclear war, pushing as far as possible without starting a war, testing the limit of how far you can push, right? That is brinksmanship. Okay, so the fact Soviet ships did not respect the blockade, and Castro, because of this naval blockade, he started mobilizing his forces in Cuba ready for potential US attack. And he said that these troops will be willing to die fighting the war. So it is the interpretation of the missile as an aggressive action that led to this naval blockade, and hence these things strained relationship between the Soviets and the US because they both misinterpreted each other as aggressive nations. So relations were strained and tensions were thus escalated. Okay, so it works both ways, this naval blockade thing. It can be that Soviet was the one who responded negatively to this naval blockade, or it can also be because of the naval blockade tensions increase. Okay, so this is Kennedy looking very smirk. So next question, who won the Cuban Missile Crisis? You can say that Kennedy won because his reputation increased greatly. He had the courage to stand up to Khrushchev and make the Soviets back down. He was firm in the midst of pressure from his own committee to call for airstrikes, and if that were to happen, a war would definitely break out. But he managed to go against this, stand firm in his beliefs that we shouldn't have airstrikes, we should have the naval blockade first to pressure the Soviet into giving in, and that is what the Soviets did in the end. They gave in. Okay, he was praised as someone who managed to avert a nuclear war, and he decided to give up the missiles because the missiles were already not functioning well or not in a good state. So in this sense, his political stature as a leader improved because he made Khrushchev back down and removed the missiles in Cuba, averting a nuclear crisis. So in this case, Kennedy won. Okay, Ritz back down on Cuba. Actual newspaper, Kennedy says nation step away from danger. World sighs in relief. So he was actually seen as a hero that averted nuclear war for the world. Okay, but you can also say that US lost or Kennedy lost because this whole thing escalated tensions beyond proportions and led to the unhappiness of different parties, especially the international parties. Because they also play an active role, right? Britain urged caution for Kennedy. Pope John was a mediator between US and Soviets. And they believe Kennedy overreacted because Europeans had the missiles facing them, the Soviet missiles, for many years and nothing happened. So they believe that Kennedy is overreacting and causing tensions to rise. Okay, NATO is unhappy because the missiles are removed in the Jupiter missiles, which will protect the Europes from the Soviet aggression. And of course, the USA still had to deal with communist Cuba as its backyard, and they agreed not to attack, but to allow Castro's Cuba to continue being the government of Cuba, a communist government in their backyard. So in this sense, Kennedy lost out because Cuba still was communist and the Soviet communism was still strengthened in the region of Americas. So brinksmanship resulted in unhappiness of the international community. Right? So this idea that both of us have nuclear weapons and the world was on the verge of a nuclear war with high tensions show that Kennedy's actions actually escalated the war greatly. But you can also say that the Soviets won because the missiles are removed in Turkey, so they assured for their security. They secured a base in Cuba free from American invasion. They secured their relationship with Cuba. Nuclear war was averted. Same can be said of the Soviets as well for playing a role in averting the nuclear war. And the USSR also gained a stronghold in negotiation power, especially over all the Cold War conflicts, including West Berlin and Korea and Vietnam. Right now, they were even more powerful because communism was strengthened. The relationship between Cuba and the Soviet Union was strengthened, and the Soviets no longer needed to feel threatened by the Jupiter missiles in Turkey. So in this way, there were significant gains for the growth, power, and influence of communism, and that's why the Soviets were the main victors in the Cuban Missile Crisis. Okay, so this is a picture of the Jupiter missiles in Turkey. So I hope you can remember this point. And then of course you can say Cubans won as well because they secured security from US invasion because there was a high chance of US not stopping to invade and take over the government, not take over, but install their own puppet government again. Because this is seen in the Bay of Pigs and Operation Mongoon. So Castro was convinced American invasion was high. So the fact that he managed to get US to agree not to invade Cuba again. So that shows that Cuba was protected from potential invasion and hence security was gained and thus Cuba were the winners. And they also managed to get a strong relationship with the Soviet Union. So that is how you can argue that the Cubans won the crisis. Okay, last question. Did the Cuban Missile Crisis disrupt the world peace? Yes, because it brought the world to a degree of high tension. Troops were mobilized, 100,000 troops in Florida. In the same way, Castro also mobilized 3,000 Cubans, readiness to die fighting. All the brinksmanship policies, the naval blockade, the refusal to back down, the spy plane being shot down, okay, the missiles in Turkey and all these negotiation thing, the 13 days of high tension actually shows that the world was on the brink of a nuclear war and tensions could break out easily if left unresolved. So in this case, world peace was disrupted, and the fact that you're studying this shows that it is significant enough that it almost changed the world, how the world was shaped. Okay. Yes, also because relationship between USSR and China is strained. China called USSR paper tiger for agreeing with the US to back down. Communist was divided between the strain of Chinese and Soviet relation because China claimed that Khrushchev is seen as a weakling, a weak leader, and not fit to lead the communist movement for backing down with the US. So now the world needs to deal with not only two ideologies, USSR, Soviets, communism and democracy, but also they have to deal with the split between communism. So effectively, there were many tensions in the world because of this. Okay, world torn between two ideologies, you either belong to one or the other. Okay, there are very few countries that stayed neutral and tense relationship within communist bloc as well. So all these different parties of this agreement can lead to a great disruption in world peace if one party decides to take military action. Okay, so the world was in high tensions and world peace was definitely disrupted because of this crisis. Okay, so you see the China blowing fire to the Soviet Union as a bear. Okay, so different groups were on the verge of an outbreak of war. World peace was disrupted. Okay, but you can also say no because Khrushchev and Kennedy were very noble. They managed to quickly avert the war. They agreed to remove missiles in both areas, Jupiter missiles in Turkey as well as non-invasion of Cuba, and the missiles in Cuba as well. So war was inverted, destruction of missiles took place, peace resumed. So a full-scale war did not break out because of this resolution, because of the willingness of the leaders. So world peace was actually technically not disrupted. I know also because Soviet and US relations improved. Because of this crisis, it led to a hotline set up between US and USSR that they both can talk in case of emergency. They both agreed to support disarmament and limitation of nuclear arms. Jupiter missiles removed, Cuban missiles removed, and they signed a treaty, a nuclear test ban treaty, and the non-proliferation of nuclear weapons treaty signed, NPNW, to disallow nuclear technology to be shared with other countries. So you can say that relations improved between US and Soviet because they managed to work out a diplomatic way to solve this crisis, and it led to strengthening of their so-called tense relationship. So elevation of tensions happened. There was better understanding, peace was promoted, and hence it did not lead to a disruption of world peace. So that is how you argue on this point. Okay, I believe this is the last slide. Yes, a nuclear war was averted and hence world peace was not disrupted. Okay, so that concludes the whole of Cuban Missile Crisis potential essays that may come out. I believe this is easier than the Korean War, but nonetheless, you cannot predict which one will come out, or the Cold War may come out also. So stay tuned for some more videos. Happy revising.